In the furthest reaches of known space, where 17 different alien empires converge at the edge of the galaxy, there stands a gate. Not just any gate. The Threshold Gate, a portal to dimensions beyond imagination, containing technologies that could reshape the universe itself. For 3 centuries, massive fleets have gathered here. Millions of warships from the Zephyrian hegemony, the crystalline armadas of the Veltar Empire, and the biomechanical horrors of the Kresh Collective all hover in an uneasy truce, their weapons trained not on each other, but on a single, unremarkable space station. The station is small, barely larger than a civilian transport. It has no shields, no massive weapons arrays, no defensive fleet. It is operated by exactly one being, a human named Marcus Chun, who sits in a worn leather chair, feet propped up on his console, reading an ancient paper book while sipping coffee from a ceramic mug that reads Galaxy's Okayest Gatekeeper. The alien commanders don't understand it. Their analysts have run every simulation. Their spies have gathered every piece of intelligence possible. By every metric known to military science, they should be able to sweep past this human in seconds. Their combined firepower could glass entire star systems. Yet none dare advance. Because 300 years ago, when the first expedition tried to force their way through, only one ship returned. Its crew was found in their mess hall, playing cards and laughing, with no memory of the past 6 months. The ship's weapons had been replaced with children's toys. Every piece of military technology had been converted into something absurdly peaceful. Communications arrays became wind chimes, torpedo tubes became flower planters, and the main computer had been reprogrammed to only speak in limericks. Since then, 97 separate attempts have been made by different species, each one more elaborate and careful than the last. Every single expedition has returned fundamentally changed, their aggression mysteriously transformed into an inexplicable desire to start pottery classes or learn interpretive dance. The strange part? Marcus Chun has never fired a shot. He's never even stood up from his chair during an attack. He just smiles, waves, and somehow impossibly wins. Today, however, something is different. For the first time in 3 centuries, Marcus Chun has put down his book. Marcus Chun stretched his legs and looked out through the observation deck of Station Haven, his home for the past 47 years. The view never got old. 17 different alien fleets arranged in a perfect sphere around his tiny station, each one maintaining exactly the same distance from the threshold gate behind him. It was like living inside the most expensive and deadly snow globe in the universe. He took another sip of his coffee and glanced at the communication board. 14 new messages had arrived overnight, all following the same pattern. Demands for passage, threats of overwhelming force, offers of unimaginable wealth, and, occasionally, very polite requests that included detailed family photos and promises of friendship. Marcus had stopped reading them years ago, but he still kept count. Today's total brought the grand number of formal requests to 847,432. The book in his lap was a battered copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which seemed appropriate given his circumstances. He'd read it approximately 400 times, but it still made him chuckle. Douglas Adams would have loved this situation. A human sitting at the edge of reality, armed with nothing but wit and an inexplicable ability to turn the universe's most fearsome warriors into confused pacifists. Marcus wasn't entirely sure how he did it either. It had started as an accident. 47 years ago, he'd been a junior engineer on a survey mission. Their small research vessel, the Curiosity, had been investigating the strange energy readings emanating from this sector when they discovered the gate. The Threshold Gate was unlike anything in human or alien databases. It stood 30 kilometers tall, made of a material that wasn't quite matter and wasn't quite energy. Ancient runes covered its surface, shifting and changing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Through its center, reality seemed to fold in on itself, revealing glimpses of dimensions where physics worked differently. The survey team had barely begun their preliminary scans when the first alien fleet arrived. The Zephyrians had claimed the gate as a holy relic, property of their empire by right of discovery. Within hours, 3 more fleets had arrived, each making similar claims. Within days, the sector had become a powder keg, with 17 different species pointing weapons at each other. Marcus's captain had tried to evacuate, but the Curiosity had been caught in the crossfire when the shooting started. The ship had taken critical damage, life support failing, hull breached in 17 places. Marcus had been the only survivor, trapped in the engineering section with enough air for maybe 6 hours. He thought he was going to die. Instead, he'd gotten angry. Really, really angry. The alien fleets had been destroying each other over something they didn't understand, something that clearly predated all of their civilizations combined. They were like children fighting over a nuclear reactor with no idea what they were actually handling. So Marcus had done something that, in retrospect, was either brilliantly insane or insanely brilliant. He'd hotwired his ship's communications array and started talking to all of them at once. "Attention, assholes," had been his opening line. "This is Engineer Marcus Chun of the Earth vessel Curiosity. You just killed my entire crew fighting over something you don't understand. So here's what's going to happen. I'm claiming this gate under Article 47 of the Galactic Salvage Rights Convention. Any objections can be filed with my lawyer." He'd paused for dramatic effect, then added, "I don't have a lawyer." The response had been immediate and predictable. 17 different species had turned their weapons on his dying ship and demanded he surrender immediately or be vaporized. Marcus had looked around his failing life support systems, at the bodies of his friends, at the impossible gate looming outside, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He'd laughed. Not a bitter laugh or a crazy laugh, but a genuine, deeply amused laugh. Because the situation was so absurd, so completely ridiculous, that anger seemed inadequate. Here he was, one human in a broken ship, being threatened by the combined military might of 17 galactic empires, over a gate that nobody understood. "You know what?" he'd said into the comm, "shoot me. Go ahead. But let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to kill me, and then you're going to fight each other for months, maybe years over this gate. Thousands of you are going to die. Med million. And in the end, whoever wins is going to try to use the gate without understanding it. And something terrible is going to happen. Because that's what humans call irony." He'd paused, watching the weapons systems charging on the nearest ships. Or he'd continued, "You could let me live long enough to figure out what this thing actually is. Because I'm an engineer, and engineers are really good at figuring things out. And unlike you, I don't have an empire to protect or honor to uphold. I just want to understand." The Zephyrian fleet commander, Admiral Kithira Moonwhisper, had responded first. Her voice had carried the kind of authority that came from crushing entire star systems. "Human, you are in no position to negotiate. Surrender immediately." "Actually," Marcus had replied, "I think I'm in the perfect position to negotiate. Because I'm about to die anyway. And dead men have a tendency to do really stupid, unpredictable things. For instance, I could rig my ship's reactor to explode and see what happens when antimatter meets whatever that gate is made of. Probably nothing good." There had been a long silence. "What are you proposing, human?" This time it was the Veltar Empress, her crystalline voice tinkling like broken glass. "I'm proposing we all take a step back and think about this logically. You want to use the gate, but you don't know what it does. I want to not die, and I'm good at figuring out alien technology. How about we work together?" The next few hours have been the most intense diplomatic negotiation in galactic history, conducted entirely by a dying human with nothing left to lose. Marcus had proposed a simple arrangement. The fleets would maintain a safe distance while he studied the gate. In exchange, he would share any discoveries with all parties equally. No one would be allowed to approach the gate without his permission, but everyone would benefit from any technological advances he uncovered. It should never have worked. Galactic politics didn't operate on trust and mutual benefit. They operated on power, conquest, and the assumption that any advantage gained by one species was automatically a disadvantage for all others. But Marcus had one thing going for him that none of the alien commanders expected. He was genuinely curious about the gate, with no hidden agenda. He didn't want to conquer anyone or steal anyone's technology. He just wanted to understand. More importantly, he'd been honest about his limitations. He'd told them exactly how long his life support would last, exactly what his ship could and couldn't do, and exactly what his qualifications were. In a universe full of beings who lied, cheated, and manipulated as naturally as breathing, Marcus's straightforward approach had been so unexpected that it had actually worked. The alien commanders had agreed to a temporary ceasefire while they considered his proposal. The temporary ceasefire had lasted long enough for Marcus to jury-rig a basic life support system and start his preliminary investigation of the gate. The preliminary investigation had revealed that the gate was not just a portal, but some kind of reality adjustment device that responded to consciousness and intent. And that was when things had gotten interesting. The first real test of the arrangement had come 3 weeks later, when the Kresh Collective had decided that patience was for the weak. They'd sent a stealth fleet to capture the gate while Marcus was sleeping. The plan had been perfect, executed with precision and overwhelming force. Except Marcus hadn't been sleeping. He'd been reading a technical manual on dimensional physics while eating a sandwich, and he'd noticed the incoming ships on his sensors. He tried to hail them, but they'd ignored his communications. So he'd done what any reasonable person would do when faced with an invasion fleet. He'd asked the gate for help. Not in words exactly, more like a feeling. A simple, earnest request for assistance in dealing with people who wouldn't listen to reason. The gate had responded by doing something that should have been impossible according to every known law of physics. It had given the entire Kresh fleet a sudden, overwhelming urge to create art. The biomechanical warriors who had spent their lives perfecting the art of destruction had found themselves inexplicably compelled to explore their creative sides. Within hours, the most feared military force in the galaxy had been transformed into the galaxy's most enthusiastic sculpture garden. Their ships had been remodeled into abstract masterpieces, their weapons had become paint brushes, and their commanding officers had started wearing berets and arguing about the philosophical implications of color theory. The fleet had returned to Kresh space 3 days later, completely unharmed, but fundamentally changed. They'd established the first Kresh Art Academy within a week and had never shown any interest in military conquest again. Word had spread quickly. The human at the gate had some kind of power that could transform the most aggressive warriors into peaceful artists. Theories had ranged from advanced mind control to reality-warping technology to simple magic. But every attempt to understand or counter the effect had failed, because the truth was simpler and more strange than anyone imagined. Marcus didn't have any special technology or psychic powers. He just had the ability to be genuinely himself, without pretense or hidden agenda. And the gate responded to that honesty by making things work out in his favor. Not through force or manipulation, but by gently adjusting reality to encourage the kind of behavior that Marcus believed in. It was like having a cosmic approval rating system, where sincerity and good intentions were rewarded with inexplicable good fortune. Over the years, Marcus had settled into his role as the unofficial guardian of the gate. He'd built Station Haven from salvage parts and debris, creating a comfortable home that felt more like a cabin in the woods than a military installation. He'd established a routine of research, reading, and very occasionally dealing with beings who couldn't take no for an answer. The alien fleets had become a permanent fixture, their commanders changing every few years, but their positions remaining constant. Some species had tried elaborate schemes to bypass his defenses. Others had attempted diplomatic approaches. A few had simply waited, hoping he would eventually die of old age. None had succeeded because Marcus had the one thing that none of them understood. He was content. He didn't want to conquer the galaxy or accumulate wealth or power. He just wanted to read his books, drink his coffee, and occasionally make new discoveries about the most fascinating piece of technology in the universe. That contentment was his greatest strength and their greatest weakness. You couldn't defeat someone who wasn't fighting you, couldn't outmaneuver someone who wasn't playing the same game, couldn't intimidate someone who had nothing left to lose and everything he wanted. Marcus finished his coffee and glanced at the communication board again. A new message had arrived, this one marked with the seal of the Zephyrian hegemony. Admiral Moonwhisper had been replaced years ago, but her successors maintained the same formal courtesy in their communications. He opened the message and smiled. It was an invitation to Admiral Starweaver's retirement party, along with a recipe for something called Zephyrian Sunset Cake and a request for his opinion on whether purple or blue decorations would look better in low gravity. Marcus made a note to send a congratulatory message and perhaps share his grandmother's brownie recipe. It was strange how the most feared warriors in the galaxy had gradually become his pen pals, but he'd learned to appreciate the friendships that had developed over the decades. He was composing his reply when the sensors chimed. A new ship was approaching, but this one was different. It wasn't part of any of the established fleets, and it wasn't following the traditional approach patterns. More concerning, it was broadcasting a signal that Marcus had never heard before. The ship was small, sleek, and completely black. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a hole in space that hurt to look at directly. As it approached, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The ship stopped exactly where the others maintained their vigil. But instead of hailing the various fleet commanders or demanding passage, it sent a single, direct message to Marcus. Guardian Chun. The message read, "My name is Ambassador Void. I represent interests that predate your gate and supersede your authority. We need to talk." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then looked out at the alien fleets. For the first time in 47 years, they seemed restless. Ships were adjusting positions, weapons systems were powering up, and communication traffic between the fleets had increased dramatically. Something was happening. Something that even the gate's reality-adjusting influence couldn't simply smooth over with good intentions and artistic inspiration. Marcus put down his coffee cup and reached for the communication controls. Whatever was about to happen, he had the feeling that his peaceful existence as the universe's most reluctant gatekeeper was about to come to an end. But first, he was going to finish reading his chapter. Because if the universe was about to end, at least he wanted to know how Ford Prefect was going to get out of his latest predicament. Outside his window, the black ship waited with the patience of something that had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. And in the distance, the threshold gate pulsed with energies that stretched across dimensions, as if it too was preparing for something that had been postponed far too long. Marcus Chun had met a lot of unusual beings over the past 47 years, but Ambassador Void was definitely the strangest. The entity that materialized in his station's small conference room didn't quite seem to exist in the same way everything else did. It was humanoid in shape, but appeared to be made of the space between stars, dark and cold, and somehow more real than reality itself. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Guardian Chun," Void said, its voice sounding like distant thunder heard through water. "I apologize for the theatrical entrance, but my people prefer to make an impression." Marcus gestured to the chair across from him, noting that his guest didn't quite cast a shadow despite the room's lighting. "Your people being?" "The architects," Void replied, settling into the chair with movements that seemed to bend space around them. "We built the gate you've been guarding, approximately 4.7 million years ago, by your calendar." Marcus had been expecting something like this for decades. The gate was clearly far older than any known civilization, and its technology operated on principles that seemed to transcend conventional physics. Still, having his suspicions confirmed felt oddly anticlimactic. "And you're here because?" "Because it's time," Void said simply. "The gate has served its purpose as a test, and you have proven adequate to our needs." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Adequate? That's the nicest compliment I've gotten in years." If Void was amused, it didn't show. The gate was never intended as a portal, Guardian Chun. It's a selection mechanism. a way of identifying species and individuals who possess the qualities necessary for the next phase of galactic evolution. Which would be? Void gestured, and the air between them shimmered. Images began to form, showing star maps and civilizations Marcus didn't recognize. For 4.7 million years, we have watched species rise and fall. We have observed patterns of behavior that repeat across countless worlds. Aggression, expansion, conflict, destruction. The cycle continues endlessly, and each time, civilizations reach a point where they must either evolve beyond their destructive impulses or destroy themselves. The images showed worlds reduced to ash, space battles that consumed entire star systems, and the slow decay of empires that had grown too large and violent to sustain themselves. Most fail, Void continued. They become too focused on power, on conquest, on the belief that strength comes from the ability to dominate others. But occasionally, very rarely, we find individuals who represent a different path. Marcus thought about the alien fleets surrounding his station, how they gradually transformed from aggressive invaders to reluctant neighbors to actual friends. Let me guess. I'm one of those individuals. You are the first in over 300,000 years, Void confirmed. You have demonstrated the ability to resolve conflict without violence, to inspire cooperation without coercion, and to maintain your principles even when faced with overwhelming opposition. More importantly, you have done so without seeking power for yourself. Because I don't want power, Marcus said. It seems like a lot of work for not much benefit. Exactly. Void's form seemed to solidify slightly, becoming more present. Power corrupts because most beings seek it for its own sake. But true leadership comes from those who accept responsibility reluctantly and wield authority with restraint. Marcus was beginning to get a bad feeling about where this conversation was heading. What exactly are you asking me to do? The images in the air changed, showing the 17 fleets that had surrounded his station for decades. But now Marcus could see additional information overlaid on each ship, detailed analyses of their crews and capabilities. The species gathered here represent 17 different evolutionary paths, Void explained. Each has reached the critical point where they must either transcend their aggressive nature or face extinction. Your presence has created a unique opportunity for accelerated evolution. You mean the weird reality warping thing that happens when people try to attack me? The gate responds to genuine intent, Void said. When beings approach with violence and hatred, it adjusts their neural chemistry to encourage more positive emotions. When they approach with curiosity and peaceful intentions, it enhances their natural abilities and intelligence. You have become the focal point for this process because your own intentions are pure. Marcus looked out through the conference room's window at the nearest Zephyrian battleship. So you're saying I've been accidentally evolving entire species? Not accidentally. The gate recognizes your nature and amplifies it. Every being who has interacted with you has been subtly improved, their capacity for violence reduced, and their capacity for creativity and cooperation enhanced. The process normally takes millions of years, but your presence has compressed it into decades. That's... Marcus paused, tried to process the implications. That's terrifying. It is also necessary, Void said. The galaxy is approaching another critical juncture. New species are emerging, older ones are entering their final aggressive phases, and the potential for a conflict that could sterilize entire sectors is growing daily. We need these 17 species to serve as examples for the others. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fleets that had become such a familiar part of his life. He could see Admiral Starweaver's flagship, decorated with the purple and blue banners they'd eventually decided on for her retirement party. The Veltar crystal ships caught the light from the nearby star and threw rainbows across space. Even the former Kresh war vessels had been painted in bright, cheerful colors that reflected their crew's newfound artistic sensibilities. What happens to them if I refuse to help, he asked. They continue evolving at the natural rate, Void replied. Most will likely destroy themselves within the next 1,000 years. A few might survive long enough to transcend their violent nature, but the process would be slow and costly. Marcus turned back to face his guest. And if I agree, we accelerate the process. The gate's influence is expanded, modified to work without your direct presence. These 17 species become the first generation of what your kind might call enlightened civilizations. They serve as teachers and guides for other species approaching the same evolutionary crossroads. At what cost? Void's form flickered, becoming slightly more transparent. You would need to leave your station and travel to other gates throughout the galaxy. There are 47 in total, each one dormant and waiting for activation. The process would take approximately 200 years and would require you to maintain the same level of genuine, peaceful intent that you have demonstrated here. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. 200 years away from home. The human lifespan is approximately 80 years, Void observed. We would need to enhance your longevity significantly. And I'd be doing this alone? Initially, yes. But as the process continues and more species evolve beyond their aggressive nature, you would have companions. Eventually, you would be working with representatives from dozens of enlightened civilizations. Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. The weight of the decision felt enormous. He thought about his small station, his books, his quiet life watching the gate, and corresponding with retired alien admirals. It wasn't much, but it was his. What about the beings who are already here? He asked. My friends. They would be among the first to benefit from the accelerated evolution. Within a generation, their species would move beyond the need for military fleets and territorial disputes. They would become explorers, artists, scientists, and philosophers instead of warriors. Marcus looked at the communication board, where messages from his alien neighbors continued to arrive. Recipes, philosophical discussions, requests for advice on everything from child-rearing to starship design. Over the decades, the most feared military commanders in the galaxy had gradually become his pen pals, sharing their thoughts and dreams with a human they'd never met in person. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Void said, standing smoothly. But I should warn you that time is a factor. Our long-range sensors have detected several species that are approaching critical aggression thresholds. Without intervention, we estimate a galactic war will begin within the next 50 years. How bad? Total extinction of all spacefaring life within this galactic arm, Void said matter-of-factly. The weapons being developed are designed to ensure that losing is impossible, which means winning becomes meaningless. Everyone dies together. Marcus stared at his hands. 47 years of peaceful existence, of quiet research, and friendly correspondence, and now he was being asked to take responsibility for the entire galaxy's future. Why me? He asked finally. There have to be other beings out there who could do this job better. Better equipped, perhaps, Void agreed. More intelligent, certainly. But none with your particular combination of traits. You are genuinely peaceful without being passive, genuinely curious without being manipulative, and genuinely caring without being possessive. Most importantly, you are genuinely content with a simple life, which makes you immune to the corruption that power inevitably brings to others. I don't feel particularly special. That's exactly why you are, Void said, and for the first time, Marcus thought he detected something like warmth in the entity's voice. The individuals who seek power are the least suited to wield it. The ones who would use it responsibly are those who want nothing to do with it. Void moved toward the door, then paused. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. Until then, perhaps you should speak with your neighbors. Ask them what they want for their children and grandchildren. Ask them what kind of galaxy they'd like to live in. After the ambassador left, Marcus sat alone in his conference room for a long time, staring out at the fleets that had become the backdrop of his life. The Zephyrian ships with their elegant curves and silver hulls, the crystalline beauty of the Veltar vessels, the cheerfully painted former war machines of the Kresh Collective. Each one represented thousands of beings who had families, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. He thought about Admiral Starweaver, who had spent 40 years as a military commander, but now sent him poetry along with her tactical reports. He thought about Crystalline Song of Joy, the Veltar artist who had replaced their previous military commander and who painted abstract representations of music in zero gravity. He thought about Kreshu Sculpts Tomorrow, the former bioweapon designer who now created living art that grew and changed over time. All of them had been transformed by their proximity to the gate, their aggressive nature gradually replaced by creativity and wonder. They were living proof that evolution was possible, that beings didn't have to be trapped by their violent instincts forever. But they were also his friends, the only family he'd had for nearly half a century. Marcus activated his communication system and began composing a message to the fleet commanders. Not a formal diplomatic communication, but a simple, personal note. To all my neighbors, he began, I hope this finds you well. I have some news that I'd like to share with you, and a question that I need help answering. He paused, looking out at the ships that surrounded his station like a protective constellation. I've learned something about our gate that changes everything. It turns out we've all been part of something much larger than we realized. And now I have to decide whether to leave you to help others the way the gate has helped us. He continued typing, explaining about the architects and their offer about the other gates waiting throughout the galaxy and about the choice he had to make. He didn't ask for advice directly, but he let them know that their opinions mattered to him. When he finished the message, he sent it to all 17 fleets simultaneously. Then he made himself another cup of coffee and returned to his book. Within an hour, his communication board was overloaded with responses. Some were brief expressions of support, others were detailed analyses of the implications, and a few were angry demands that he not even consider leaving. But as the hours passed and more messages arrived, a pattern began to emerge. They understood. Admiral Starweaver's response was typical. Marcus, my friend, this is exactly the kind of impossible choice that proves why you're the right person for the job. If you could walk away from this responsibility, you would be the wrong choice. Since you're struggling with the decision, you're obviously the right one. Crystalline Song of Joy had sent a musical composition that somehow conveyed the idea that growth required change, even when change was painful. Kreshu Sculpts Tomorrow had created a sculpture that showed a single figure walking away from a beautiful garden to plant seeds in barren ground. They all, in their own ways, were telling him the same thing. The choice was his, but they would understand whatever he decided. Marcus spent the night reading their messages and thinking about the future. By morning, he had made his decision. When Ambassador Void returned, Marcus was ready with his answer. Ambassador Void materialized in Marcus's conference room exactly 24 hours later, finding the human sitting in the same chair with his coffee and book, as if their previous conversation had been a simple discussion about the weather. Guardian Chun, Void said, settling into the opposite chair. Have you reached a decision? Marcus marked his page and set the book aside. I have, but first, I need to understand something. You say the gate responds to genuine intent, that it can tell the difference between real, peaceful intentions and fake ones. Correct. So it would know if I was lying to you right now. It would. Marcus smiled. Good. Because what I'm about to propose is going to sound like manipulation, but it's not. It's just engineering. Void's form seemed to sharpen with interest. Explain. You need someone to activate 47 gates across the galaxy and spend 200 years turning violent species into peaceful ones. I'm willing to do that, but not alone. The process requires a specific psychological profile, Void said carefully. Finding other suitable candidates would take considerable time. I don't want other candidates, Marcus said. I want my neighbors. Void was silent for a moment. The beings surrounding the station are representatives of the species we hope to evolve. They cannot serve as catalysts for their own transformation. They're not representatives anymore, Marcus said firmly. They're individuals. Admiral Starweaver hasn't answered to the Zephyrian High Command in 15 years. Crystalline Song of Joy was exiled from Veltar space for refusing to develop new weapons technology. Kreshu Sculpstamaro was declared legally dead by his own people when he chose art over warfare. Marcus stood and walked to the window, gesturing at the fleets beyond. Look at them, really look. These aren't military formations anymore. They're communities, families. They've stayed here for decades, not because their governments ordered them to, but because they found something worth protecting. The gate's influence has changed them, Void acknowledged. But they remain biologically and culturally linked to their original species. Exactly, Marcus said, which makes them perfect for what you're asking me to do. You want to accelerate evolution by using the gates to transform aggressive species into peaceful ones. But transformation works better when it comes from within, when the examples of change come from their own people rather than from alien influences. Marcus turned back to face the ambassador. What you're proposing is a top-down approach. Send me to 47 worlds and impose enlightenment from the outside. But that's not how real change works. Real change comes from seeing your own people, your own friends, and family choose a different path. Void's form flickered with what might have been confusion. You propose to take these evolved individuals with you as missionary ambassadors to their own species. I propose to take them with me as friends, Marcus corrected. Let Admiral Starweaver talk to other Zephyrian commanders about the benefits of poetry over warfare. Let Crystalline Song of Joy show other Veltar artists how to create beauty instead of destruction. Let Kreshu Sculpstamuro demonstrate that strength can be used to build rather than break. Marcus sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. You've been approaching this as an engineering problem. How to modify species X to reduce aggression by Y%. But it's not an engineering problem. It's a social one. And social change happens through relationships, through trust, through seeing people you respect make different choices. Void considered this for a long moment. The logistical complications would be significant. 47 worlds, 17 different species, each with their own cultural and biological requirements. Nothing we can't handle, Marcus said confidently. We've been living together in the same small space for decades. If we can make it work here, we can make it work anywhere. And you believe they would agree to such an arrangement? Marcus smiled and activated his communication system. Why don't we ask them? The response was immediate and unanimous. Not only did the various commanders want to join the mission, they'd apparently been discussing the possibility among themselves for hours and had already begun making plans. Admiral Starweaver's message was typical. Marcus, you beautiful fool. Did you really think we'd let you save the galaxy without us? We've been your neighbors for 40 years. We're not letting you go alone. Crystalline Song of Joy had somehow managed to compose a musical piece that conveyed the concept of obvious excitement mixed with mild exasperation at human density. Kreshu Sculpstamaro had created a holographic sculpture showing Marcus surrounded by ships from all 17 fleets, with the caption, "Family does not abandon family." Even the smaller delegations from species Marcus rarely interacted with had sent messages of support. The Thorian Hive Mind Collective wanted to contribute their expertise in large-scale coordination. The gaseous Etherians offered their services as neutral mediators. The machine intelligence from the quantum hegemony wanted to help with the technical challenges of gate activation. By the time all the responses had arrived, Marcus had a crew of several thousand volunteers from every species present, all eager to help transform the galaxy into something better. Void observed this outpouring of support with something that might have been amazement. In 4.7 million years of observation, we have never seen such cross-species cooperation. That's because you've been looking at governments and military organizations, Marcus said. Those are always going to be focused on competition and territorial control. But individuals who choose to work together? That's different. That's how real change happens. The practical challenges remain significant, Void warned. Coordinating such a diverse group across multiple star systems, maintaining supply lines for 17 different biological types, ensuring effective communication between species with fundamentally different sensory capabilities. Challenges we've already solved, Marcus pointed out. Look around. We've been doing exactly that for decades. The only difference now is scale. Marcus stood and extended his hand to the ambassador. So what do you say? Ready to try something that's never been done before? Void stared at the offered hand for a moment, then slowly reached out and clasped it. The contact was strange, like touching liquid shadow, but it conveyed a sense of agreement that went beyond words. Very well, Guardian Shun. We will attempt your approach. But I must warn you, the task ahead will be unlike anything your species has ever attempted. You will face opposition from governments, military organizations, and individuals who profit from the current system of perpetual conflict. Marcus grinned. You mean politicians and arms dealers? I've been ignoring politicians and confusing arms dealers for 47 years. I think I can handle it. The preparations took 6 months. Marcus had assumed that getting thousands of beings from 17 different species ready for a multi-century journey would be complicated, but he'd underestimated just how complicated. The Zephyrians required specific atmospheric compositions and couldn't survive in gravity fields above 0.8 standard. The Veltar needed crystalline growth mediums and couldn't tolerate electromagnetic interference above certain frequencies. The Kresh Collective required biological support systems that were technically alive and had their own dietary requirements. But the real challenge was psychological. Many of the crew members had never left their home systems before coming to the gate. The prospect of traveling to unknown worlds and potentially never returning was daunting even for beings who had already chosen to abandon their original cultures. Marcus spent weeks talking with individuals and small groups, listening to their concerns and helping them work through their fears. He found that the key was focusing on the positive aspects of the mission rather than the sacrifices required. We're not leaving home, he told them during one group session. We're expanding the definition of home. Every world we visit, every species we help, becomes part of our extended family. The concept resonated with beings who had already experienced the transformation from military enemies to chosen family. They began to see the mission not as exile, but as adventure, not as duty, but as opportunity. By the time they were ready to depart, the expedition had grown to include not just the original military crews, but artists, scientists, engineers, teachers, and philosophers from all 17 species. The collection of ships that had once been a standoff between hostile fleets had become a traveling university, workshop, and cultural exchange program. The first destination was a system called Kareth, where a species of aggressive reptilian beings had just developed faster-than-light travel and immediately begun attacking their neighbors. The Karathans were textbook examples of a species approaching critical aggression threshold, and their response to the expedition's arrival was predictably hostile. Alien vessels, you have entered Karathan space without authorization, came the transmission from their defense fleet. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Marcus looked around the bridge of his new flagship, a beautiful hybrid vessel that incorporated design elements from all 17 member species. Admiral Starweaver sat at the tactical station, but instead of weapons displays, she was monitoring the cultural analysis screens. Crystal and Song of Joy operated the communication systems, ready to translate not just language but emotional nuance between species. Kreshu Sculpts Tomorrow managed the diplomatic protocols, his artistic sensibilities helping to craft approaches that felt genuine rather than manipulative. Kareth Defense Command, Marcus replied calmly. This is Marcus Chun of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative. We're here because we like to talk with you about some opportunities that might interest your people. We're not armed, we're not making any claims on your territory, and we're not here to tell you what to do. We just have some stories to share and some questions to ask. The response came back quickly. Human vessel, your intentions are irrelevant. You will surrender or be fired upon. Marcus looked at Admiral Starweaver, who smiled and activated the expedition's secret weapon, the mobile gate enhancement system that Ambassador Void had provided them. The effect was immediate. The Carathan ships, which had been charging their weapons and preparing to attack, suddenly found themselves confused, not about their location or their mission, but about why they were so angry. The overwhelming rage that had defined their species for millennia began to fade, replaced by curiosity and a strange desire to understand rather than destroy. Carrot Defense Command, Marcus said gently, "Would you like to hear about how we learned to make friends with people we used to want to fight?" What followed was a conversation that lasted 3 days and ended with the Carathan fleet requesting permission to send cultural ambassadors to learn from the expedition. Within a year, the Carathans had transformed from galactic menace to enthusiastic participants in interstellar cooperation projects. The pattern repeated across system after system. The expedition would arrive, activate the gate enhancement, and begin the patient work of helping aggressive species discover alternatives to violence. Not through force or coercion, but through example, friendship, and the simple demonstration that cooperation produced better results than conflict. Some species were easy to work with. Others required months or even years of careful relationship building. A few were so set in their aggressive patterns that the gate enhancement had minimal effect, and the expedition had to move on after establishing small colonies of individuals who chose to embrace the new way of thinking. But the overall success rate was extraordinary. Within 50 years, the expedition had visited 23 systems and successfully transformed 19 of them. The transformed species began sending their own expeditions to neighboring systems, spreading the changes organically rather than through imposed conversion. Marcus, now biologically enhanced to survive the long journey, but still fundamentally himself, found that his role had evolved from leader to facilitator. The expedition had become a self-organizing community that required minimal direction from him. Each species contributed their unique strengths to the collective effort, and problems were solved through collaboration rather than central command. The breakthrough came during their visit to the Nexus system, where 7 different species were locked in a perpetual 7-way war that had been raging for over 2,000 years. The expedition arrived to find the system devastated, most habitable worlds reduced to radioactive wastelands, and the surviving populations living in fortified asteroid bases and mobile battle stations. "This is hopeless," Admiral Starweaver said as they surveyed the destruction. "They've been fighting so long, they don't even remember what started the war. Their entire cultures are built around hatred for the other 6 species." "Actually," Marcus said thoughtfully, "this might be our best opportunity yet." "How do you figure that?" Marcus pointed to the tactical display showing the 7 fleets facing each other in a complex 3-dimensional standoff. "Look at their formation. They're not trying to win anymore. They're just trying to make sure no one else wins either. They're as tired of this war as we are." "But the gate enhancement has never worked on such a large scale," Crystalline Song of Joy pointed out. 7 species simultaneously, with centuries of entrenched hatred. "Then we don't try to change all of them at once," Marcus said. "We give them something more important to worry about." The plan was simple and completely insane. The expedition positioned itself directly in the center of the 7-way standoff and began broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention all combatants," Marcus announced. "This is the Galactic Cooperation Initiative. We're here to offer you a deal. Stop shooting at each other for 24 hours, and we'll show you something that will change how you think about everything." The response was immediate and unanimous. 7 different species told him to leave or be destroyed by all of them simultaneously. "Actually," Marcus continued, "we'd prefer not to leave. This seems like a nice neighborhood. Great views, interesting architecture, excellent strategic position for a cultural center. We're thinking of setting up a permanent colony right here." He paused for dramatic effect. "The thing is, we're completely unarmed and entirely peaceful. So if you want us to leave, you're going to have to shoot at us. But we're sitting right in the middle of your battle formation, so if you shoot at us, you'll probably hit each other too." The resulting silence lasted for almost a full minute. Also, Marcus added cheerfully, "We have really good food, and we're willing to share." What followed was the strangest ceasefire in galactic history. 7 species who had been trying to exterminate each other for 2 millennia agreed to a temporary truce so they could figure out what to do about the crazy aliens who wanted to build a cultural center in the middle of their war zone. The 24-hour ceasefire stretched into a week as representatives from all 7 species came aboard the expedition ships to negotiate the humans' removal. But instead of negotiations, they found themselves participating in cultural exchange programs, philosophical discussions, and collaborative art projects. The gate enhancement worked slowly but steadily, reducing the aggressive impulses that had sustained the war, while enhancing the curiosity and creativity that had been suppressed for generations. By the end of the month, the 7 species had signed their first peace treaty in 2,000 years. By the end of the year, they had formed a cooperative alliance dedicated to rebuilding their devastated system. By the end of the decade, the Nexus system had become the unofficial capital of the growing network of transformed civilizations. The transformation wasn't perfect. Some individuals from every species remained committed to the old ways of thinking and chose to leave rather than adapt. A few groups of aggressive species proved resistant to the gate enhancement and had to be contained through careful diplomatic isolation. And there were always new challenges arising as the network of peaceful civilizations grew larger and more complex. But the fundamental pattern held. Violence could be transformed into cooperation. Hatred could become curiosity. And the cycle of perpetual conflict could be broken through patience, friendship, and this simple demonstration that there were better ways to live. Marcus, now in his 2nd century of life and his 100th year of traveling the galaxy, sat in his study aboard the expedition flagship and wrote in his journal. Outside his window, 47 gates pulsed with energy across dozens of star systems, each one serving as a beacon of peaceful transformation in a galaxy that was slowly learning to choose cooperation over conquest. His friends from the original 17 species had become the teachers and leaders of a growing movement that now spanned hundreds of worlds. Admiral Starweaver ran the Diplomatic Academy on New Zephyr, training young beings in the art of conflict resolution. Crystalline Song of Joy had established cultural exchange programs that helped newly transformed species adapt to their changed perspectives. Crush Who Sculpts Tomorrow had created living artworks that grew and evolved across entire star systems, serving as beautiful reminders that change and growth were always possible. The galaxy wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it was better. Violence still existed, but it was no longer the default solution to every problem. War still happened, but it was increasingly seen as a failure of imagination rather than a demonstration of strength. And somewhere in the vast network of peaceful worlds, children who had never known the fear of living under constant threat of destruction were growing up to become artists and explorers, teachers, and innovators, building a future that their grandparents could never have imagined. Marcus closed his journal and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow they would arrive at their next destination, a system where 2 young species had just made contact and were trying to decide whether to become friends or enemies. It would be challenging work, requiring patience and creativity and a genuine belief that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses. But then, again, that was what Marcus had been doing for over a century now. And somehow, despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, it kept working anyway. He made himself a cup of coffee, picked up his book, and prepared to do the most important job in the galaxy, proving that even in a universe full of violence and hatred, there was always room for one more friendship.